Today, we're talking about concrete. Well, concrete ideas. And abstract ones, too. I dug around in my yard for like an hour and couldn't find any abstraction, but I found some concrete. I don't think it matters that I chiseled that off my foundation. This is one of the most fundamental ideas in writing, but also probably one of the most difficult to get your head around, which makes it wholly unsuitable for the kind of hopefully less than 10 minutes long videos that I like to peddle on this channel, but we'll see how it goes. So today we're going to start with a discussion around concrete and abstract writing, and then towards the end I'll give you some more specific advice about how to apply this to your writing. Every idea falls somewhere on the spectrum between concrete and abstract. You'll often see this depicted as a ladder or a pyramid or some other kind of vertically arranged structure. These are not black and white categories. A given idea is rarely completely abstract nor completely concrete. That's the purpose of the ladder or the pyramid or whatever, to show that this is a spectrum. To show you the difference between a concrete idea and an abstract one, I'm going to use an example. I like this because it means I'm giving you the definition of concrete by using something concrete rather than abstract. If I tell you about a cat sitting on a shelf, that's a very abstract idea, especially because he refuses to sit on the shelf. The term cat does not do much to ground the reader in the scene. When I say cat, it's very unlikely that two readers will picture exactly the same cat. It could be an orange cat, a black cat, a lion, Cat Stevens, Catwoman, somebody named Catherine who goes by Cat. Everyone will likely picture something different. This is one of the problems with abstract ideas, and it goes beyond just visual imagery. Whenever you present an abstract idea to the reader will tend to make a concrete idea out of that abstract idea. And the way that they do that might not be the way that the author intended. Now, if instead I say the fluffy, pure white cat with black patches across his back and a pink nose sat on the shelf, that's a much more concrete idea. The cat that you pictured in that situation was probably more similar to the cat that everybody else pictured. Concrete ideas ground the reader in a scene. They provide sensory details about what is happening and what emotions are triggered. This is related to, but not the same thing as show versus tell. The concrete versus abstract dichotomy kind of follows the same idea as show versus tell, but they ultimately get at different issues. Showing is about presenting concrete details in an engaging way. So you can technically tell a concrete idea, but by telling instead of showing, you're making it more abstract. On the whole, showing will tend to make ideas more concrete, whereas telling will tend to make things more abstract. Now, abstract ideas are not in and of themselves bad. In fact, quite the opposite. Most of the big ideas that a story deals with, like theme, tone, and conflict, are usually very abstract concepts. On the other hand, your setting and characters tend to be much more concrete. So the story arguably arises from the intersection between an abstract idea, be it theme or conflict, and the more concrete elements like setting and characters. I mentioned before that a reader, when presented with an abstract idea, will try to make it more concrete. The same thing happens for concrete ideas. If I describe a cat rearing up, puffing out his tail, baring his claws, and hissing, that's a very concrete idea. And the reader will likely take that idea and abstract from it that the cat is angry. This is one of the most important parts of the abstract versus concrete dichotomy. Big ideas like your story's theme are rarely presented to the reader in abstract terms, even though they are very abstract ideas. Instead, they are inferred by the reader based on the concrete ideas presented in the story, namely the situations and conflict that the character deals with. Of course, it is possible to make things too concrete. You need to be careful that the concrete idea that you are presenting gets abstracted in the correct way. I've seen this with some authors who, in a dialogue scene, for instance, use very detailed body language and facial expressions to denote the reactions of the characters rather than just saying what the reaction is. The danger in this is if the reader doesn't abstract the reactions in the correct way, they might miss a character's angry reaction, thinking that it was just excitement, or they might misinterpret the reaction as something else. This might make the scene feel disjointed or odd because the character seems to be reacting in a way that doesn't make any sense. It's not that the character's reaction was bad, it's just the concrete way that the author presented it to the reader didn't allow the reader to abstract it in the right way. Humor is another good example of this. Have you ever noticed that when you read or watch something funny, there's a moment where your brain is kind of processing the idea? It's why some jokes take a minute to figure out and then they land and they're funny. That's because your brain is trying to take a concrete idea and make it abstract. This is why observational humor is such a common thing, and why humorous stories often involve relating a lot of sensory details rather than abstract ideas. When someone tells a joke, it's usually presented in a very concrete way. And if the joke doesn't land and they have to explain it, then the explanation will usually be in abstract terms. If you explain humor in an abstract way, oftentimes it stops being humor. This is true across other emotions as well, besides humor. If you take your theme and present it to the reader using very abstract terms, they likely aren't going to get the same engagement or the same enjoyment or the same catharsis, whatever emotion you're after, than if they had read a story that's filled with a lot of concrete explorations of the thematic elements. As you can probably guess, abstract ideas are much easier to convey in a concise manner. Journalism and scientific writing tend to lean on a more abstract presentation because the ideas and concepts themselves are more important than the emotional experience of exploring them. These forms also tend to have harder limits on length, which lends itself to the more concise nature of abstraction. You will occasionally see news articles that lean more concrete. I'm far from an expert on this, but I think these are called feature articles, but again, I'm not sure. These tend to be longer. They go into more detail describing certain people or processes or issues, rather than just a typical news article, which is just a summary of a recent event. The former type of article, the feature article, tends to be more concrete, while the latter leans heavily into abstraction. One is trying to entertain and engage the readers on an emotional level. The other is trying to convey information. Okay, that was a lot of talking. So how do you use this? And how much do you need to be concerned about the concrete and abstraction dichotomy? The answer to that, honestly, is probably not very much. Most of the time, if you're writing prose fiction, you want to be using concrete language with some bits of abstract language thrown in there when it's appropriate. You should be thinking about how these concrete scenes convey the abstract ideas around your tone and theme, and if needed, you can supplement these with some more abstract bits as well. Being 100% concrete can be a problem, as the reader might get lost in the ideas or they might lose sight of the bigger issues in the story. That's why having the right amount of abstraction to sort of signpost and guide the reader will provide a better balance. Any good story is going to be mostly concrete with a bit of abstraction thrown in when needed. There is, of course, no exact ratio that you should target between concrete and abstract. If your theme isn't coming across, then it could mean that you are being too concrete. Likewise, if a reader says that they don't feel emotionally invested or they feel like things are being spoon-fed to them, then that can mean that you're leaning too much into abstraction. I don't know this for a fact, but I would think that middle grade would tend to rely on abstraction a little bit more than adult works would. Just because if you're writing for a younger audience, they might not be as able to... Just because if you're writing for a younger audience, they may not be able to pick up on the emotional cues that you're laying out through concrete passages. So they might need more of that signposting, more of those kind of emotional touch points that you would deliver to the reader through abstraction to help guide them through the story and make sure that they don't get lost. Another point that I'll say here really quickly before we wrap up is generally in the opening you want to start with a very concrete scene that grounds the reader, has some emotion in it. If you start with an info dump or a big block of exposition, which is effectively an info dump, that tends to be very abstract and it's very hard for the reader to get engaged with that kind of an opening. Speaking of opening, well, actually not speaking of opening because this is the ending. So there you have it. There's a lot more that I could have said on this topic and a lot of things that I cut out from this script, but I didn't want this video to be super long. Maybe we'll explore some of those things in the future. There's some interesting interactions between abstraction and dialogue, for instance, that might make a good video. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful and at least mildly comprehensible. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.